Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game faction focus for Combined Armies Next Wave Sectoral. In this video, we're talking about who Next Wave are, how they play, what are their strengths, limitations, and faction identity, before jumping into Infinity Army to go through most of the profiles in this sectoral to showcase how they play. Next Wave are Infinity's newest sectoral. They're one of its most mechanically complicated but compelling sectorals, and there's a lot to talk about here, so let's jump in. Strengths to begin with, because Next Wave is absolutely a faction with some very clear strengths, but which are balanced by some equal limitations. That's part of what makes Next Wave so interesting. Now, setting aside mechanics for a moment, not for everyone, but a killer aesthetic if cyber dinosaurs are your thing. I don't usually talk about aesthetics when I'm doing these faction focuses because ultimately those are personal and very subjective, but there are a few armies in Infinity that really does deserve talking about how they look, and Next Wave is one of them. It has cyber dinosaurs. It's very Horizon Zero Dawn-esque, and at least for me personally, pretty top-notch from top to bottom. And that's a pretty good thing because I'm not sure how long I would have persevered with the faction, and you do need to persevere with Next Wave, if it weren't for that aesthetic. Now, there are some serious strengths here. Straight out the gate, if you go and look at their fire team's chart, it's almost overwhelming. This is a faction that can do absolute link soup, but it's not Morat style, where it's just like, yeah, every single thing links with everything else, you just do whatever you want. The links in Next Wave are all kind of different, and not everything can link with everything else, but everything has tons of options. You have to work a bit to find the ones that you want. It's complicated, it's mechanically chewy, it's interesting, and that's going to be a repeated theme for basically everything that we talk about here. The next really significant strength of Next Wave is that it's got one of the most expansive, complete, mechanically interesting, and powerful medium to top end rosters in the entire game. When we jump into Infinity Army, I am going to glow about so many profiles in this faction. I don't think there's a single faction in the game with quite as many profiles as Next Wave that makes you go, ooh, that's really cool. Can I fit that into a list? There is a catch, and we'll get to that, but it really has to be stated, wow, how many interesting things, powerful things there are in Next Wave. And none of them are broken, right? Like none of them are so powerful as to dominate the faction. Well, like maybe one and a half. But it's just quality and mechanical complexity and mechanical depth for days. And a lot of these profiles, in addition to being good, are like fun and interesting. There's many, oh wow, that's cool, it's got that rule as well moments like spread across this faction, and you'll just have like the quintessential moment in Next Wave is you'll be halfway through a game, you'll check a profile and go, aha, it's crit immune as well. Wow, that's awesome. That just makes the faction rewarding to dive into and spend time with these profiles. But there are limitations, right? All of this power comes at a cost. Now, there are a few basic ones that I would talk about in the same way that I might say, for example, Next Wave has some good gunfighting and some good close combat and compelling fire teams and powerful units that tend to combine multiple interesting mechanical strengths. Okay, well, that's cool, but what can't it do? Well, it's got low-end hacking. There are one or two good and useful utility hackers in this profile, but they are lacking a good quality killer hacker to build your army around. If you want a killer hacker in this faction, you kind of have to compromise a little bit. That's going to be a recurring theme as well. You've got, in general, kind of worse hacking than most Pan-Oceanian factions, but better than Ariadna, for example. When I did my first impressions video for this faction, my assumption was Next Wave would actually have really good entry-level hacking, but that assumption was based on the idea that they would have the good bit and kiss profile. They don't. They have the kind of unplayable one. That leaves you in a limited spot as far as hacking goes, but you can still work hacking into a bit of defense and a bit of utility. Next Wave is also a faction with some of the worst visibility control in the game. Here's this phrase again, but most Pan-Oceania has better access or easier access to zero visibility zones than Next Wave. Now, it doesn't have none, and that's very important, but it's got no models with white noise. It's got one somewhat expensive model with Eclipse, and one somewhat expensive model with regular smoke. And that's a significant limitation because expensive models in Next Wave aren't always easy to include. Finally, before we get to the big and defining weakness of Next Wave, it's also got a lot of irregulars. Now, you can compensate in some cases for those irregulars with Fireteam Masters, but actually a lot of your interesting standout profiles in this faction are irregular troopers, and so that creates more like mechanical complexity in the list building where you go, I would really like this profile, and I would really like this profile, but both of them are irregular, so both of them kind of need a Fireteam Master, not necessarily, but they'll benefit from links, and there are only so many Fireteam Masters to go around, and they are mostly expensive. And so going off reservation in Next Wave, straying away from fire teams and fire team masters, is something that you can do, and there is space to explore there, but you begin to compromise more and more the further you go. And that kind of leads us to what is the really significant mechanical limitation of Next Wave, and that is it is a faction that consistently has to compromise in its list building because it has just about the weakest bottom end of any faction in the entire game. We could have an argument, maybe there's one or two that are about the same level, maybe a little worse. Military orders is still a little thin down at those bottom rungs. But fundamentally, your bottom level troops, your cheapest troops, your 4-point, your 6-point, your 7-point, your 9-point, your 11-point, etc., he said, as if there were any 9-point profiles in this faction, there are only a very small number of cheap profiles. You very quickly run out of things that cost less than 10 points. You very quickly have to start paying 11 or 13 points for your cheapest troops, and that cuts air out of the top end of the faction. In general, there is just not going to be the infrastructure there in any Next Wave list to support more than maybe one luxury piece. Every single Next Wave list you write, or at least that I write, has sacrifices. Most Next Wave lists I write have compromised hacking. Most Next Wave lists that I write have to kind of get to buttons the hard way. They have to give up on midfield pieces. Most Next Wave lists that I write have less visibility control than I would personally like. But it's mostly worth it because if you can master those compromises that the faction demands of you, then you get access to all of those showcase, excellent, some not necessarily best in class, but very, very good quality pieces, all the way from 25 up to like 70 points. And that is what gives us such a strong faction identity for Next Wave. There is a certain kind of person who plays wargames and approaches list construction like panning for gold. You're not always going to find it, you have to do a lot of work for it, but when you have that moment and you go, aha, this is it, I found the thing, that's really cool, and that sense of reward for hard work or exploration, there's a certain kind of person who approaches list construction that way, and Next Wave is their faction. Next Wave is a faction that somehow manages to capture many of the qualities of what I've historically described as a challenge faction, but with a ton of actual power that will reward you for learning how to use it. And that's very rare. Now, personally, for my money, would I like it to be slightly easier? Yes, and there'll be a few things that I'll talk about at the very end of the video that maybe are changes I might like to see made to Next Wave in future. But if you can overcome the needs of this faction, if you can build that deep mechanical knowledge and you have that kind of honed list building mindset to make them function, then the process of climbing that list building mountain is fun and really rewarding. If you're a new player, right, if you're jumping into Infinity and you've grabbed this faction because the models look really cool, ask for help. Jump onto the main Infinity Discord. Lord knows that I have. There are things I'll talk about throughout this video that other people found that I went, yeah, no, I can use that. Sometimes I went, that's not for me, but knowing that those things were there has helped expand my knowledge of this faction, and genuinely, there are things in here that I've gotten just from listening to people talk on the Discord. If you're new, do that and ask for help. Ask for lists, see what people do, observe the trends. You can play this faction as a new player, but it is going to be one of the more difficult experiences if you try and write your lists yourself to begin with. But if you are a more experienced player, or even just an intermediate player that really likes putting lots of time into list construction, there is so much to chew on here. There is deep mechanically complicated, multi-role, multi-capability profiles that can do all sorts of different things and work together in all sorts of different ways. And of course, there's cyber dinosaurs. And all of that collectively makes Next Wave a faction that perhaps isn't my favorite for competitive play, but is one of my favorite overall, and which I can absolutely recommend spending time with. And so let's start talking about that. And we're going to begin, kind of as we tend to, with things that can form fire teams, because those are often the basis of lists, and there is no exception to that in Next Wave. It's just that things that can form fire teams is complicated. So we're going to jump around a little bit as we go through this section, but we will start with Harbinger's New Mankind Defense Infantry. Now, Harbingers are your basic line infantry and can form the basis of two different fire teams, a Harbingers fire team and a Shadow fire team. The Harbingers fire team mostly has Harbingers in it, but then we can add some extra things that count as Harbingers, and the Shadow fire team is one that starts including things like Rain Dancers, and we will see our first fire team master. Now, Harbingers on their merits are fine. They are doing that thing that combined army line infantry do, which is that they aren't allowed to be cheaper than 13 points, and so the profiles are a little bloated. This is a mostly generic line infantry profile otherwise. It's ballistic skill 11, it's willpower 13, it's armor 1, it is BTS 3. Where those 3 extra points are coming from is combat instinct, which is okay, courage, which is dodge plus 3, which is okay, and a zapper, which is quite nice to have. Would I rather these things were more efficiently costed like Fusiliers? Yes, absolutely, but this is Combined Army and we don't have that option. So hey, let's look for some circumstances where we can make use of the Zapper or Combat Instinct in particular. Now, there is a HMG and a missile launcher profile. Don't take either of them ever under any circumstance, but there are some interesting utility ones here. You might occasionally find yourself reaching for this AP Marksman Zapper profile. It's got ballistic skill attack -3, and it is the cheapest thing that might count as a gunfighter in the faction. I would generally avoid, but it is something to consider. From there, we get into the more interesting stuff, and we're going to start with the Hacker Mindlayer hacking device. 18 points is modestly expensive, but it's Mind Layer with an EM mine, and importantly, it's making use of Combat Instinct. Combat Instinct, among other things, allows a model to ignore stealth, and having your hackers be able to ignore stealth is one of those really nice quality of life things where you can start taking AROs against models moving through your network. Because you can ARO with just one thing against a model moving through your network, that kind of incentivizes a reset, and if a model reset, it breaks stealth, which lets other hackers ARO as well. Now, are you going to have that many other hackers? No, probably not. Maybe one other hacker, but it's still a really nice thing to have. Albeit 18 points. In any other faction, I might not call this expensive, but we do have to cut and crimp every point we can in Next Wave, so be aware this is a little bit of a cost. We then have a 14-point Mind Layer, probably not usually taking this profile, it's fine, but we need to be squeezing as much out of everything as we possibly can in this faction, so you would usually either spend a few points to upgrade it to a hacker or take a different cheaper profile. The Forward Observer profile is very interesting. It's one of the cheapest profiles at 13 points. It's a specialist. It's got an APSMG and Zapper, which is actually not bad for close work. And it's got a Wild Parrot, Wild Parrots are very cool, and you are going to have baggage in this faction because Echidrons are one of your cheapest regular orders. And so this model can make a very useful form of link glue. Harbinger Paramedic is a little bit expensive and I usually wouldn't take. There are plenty of models in this faction that can be recovered by a Paramedic, but if you want Medi Darts, probably take those on a profile like Pandora. And then finally, the Harbinger Lieutenant, which actually is genuinely very relevant. A lot of the list that I run, there's a good NCO that we'll talk about when we get to Stingers, and the Harbinger Lieutenant is just, it's cheap, right? It's just cheap and we need to save points somewhere, and Chain of Command is expensive, and so this is a faction where genuinely, even though they're 13 points, a lot of lists will have a Decoy Harbinger, a Harbinger Lieutenant, and just accept that they are more expensive. Sure, if these were Fusiliers, you'd be paying 6 points less for the two of them. That's a lot. But we don't have that option. We do need cheap regular orders somehow. And frankly, there are even a few things that we can staple to these guys to get worthwhile fire teams out of them. A lot of my lists are led by a Harbinger Lieutenant, so do not sleep on that as a profile, even though there are some exciting and interesting options for lieutenants in this faction. Now, staying for now inside the Harbinger's fire team in particular, let's talk about the Wraith one, in particular the fire team option, although Wraith is an interesting profile generally. All of the fire teams in this faction basically can be duos or Haris teams or cores. Some can only be duos, some can be duos and Harises. But the important thing there is that there's nothing in this faction that must be a Haris or a core, which means you can run two-person fire teams, and you can run two-person fire teams built off of your line infantry, and that means, for example, that the 13-point Harbinger Forward Observer can be joined by the Wraith 1 FTO, which counts as a Harbinger in a Harbinger's fire team, and boom, that's 38 points, and you have two models, both of them are regular, they get duo bonuses, one of them has a gun, one of them is a specialist with a wild parrot. Cool. And actually, this is a very credible gun. Now, this is a medium infantry. It's single wound. Yep, that's fine. What are we? And it's a multi-marksman rifle, which I don't necessarily love. But what are we getting here otherwise? Well, forward deployment is nice. Armor 2 BTS 3 is fine. Ballistic skill 12 is a little average, but okay, let's have a look at this row of skills. Mimetism, marksmanship, MSV 1. And while we're at it, courage, shock immunity, and a biometric visor. That's a that's a good profile for 25 points. Now, I wouldn't want to run this thing solo, but I can pay 13 points to staple a specialist to it and give it duo bonuses. This is the cheapest combat effective does everything duo, doesn't do smoke, but it does everything else duo that you can basically get in the faction. And as such, it's a really important building block. Yes, it is only packing damage 7 weapons, but it's rolling 4 dice on 15s with Mimetism and an MSV1, which means it is almost always quite favoured to win an engagement. And yes, damage 7 armor piercing is not the best damage in the world, but if you're hitting 2 or 3 times per gunfight, that'll do some work. For this reason, the Wraith F1 FTO is one of the standout profiles in the faction, just because of how it's just cheap enough when combined with a Harbinger to help us find a few extra points to do some upgrades or take some luxury pieces elsewhere. Now, the other Wraith profiles are not necessarily bad, but I generally wouldn't advise them. The multi-sniper is actually kind of interesting. You will usually have the SWC to afford it. Definitely don't take the multi-marksman hidden deployment. The multi-sniper is generally a bit more fit for purpose, and it's basically the same point cost, and you will usually have the SWC. It's a hidden deployment multi-sniper with a bunch of really cool tools. And actually, as I'm talking about it, I'm kind of selling myself on it a little bit, but at 28 points, it's a touch more expensive. It isn't making use of a 13-point model to justify it existing in your list, which helps generate like useful externalities. It subsidizes other pieces, etc. So I'm less, like, I don't hate, but I am less inclined to take the surprise attack profile, but definitely many lists will include the Wraith 1 FTO just because it's one of the cheapest ways, in combination with a 13-point forward observer or any other Harbinger of your choice, to get a cheap combat effective duo in a faction with unlimited duos. Now, while we're talking about Harbinger's fire teams, we will mention one of the big things that can link with them. There's other stuff that we'll mention, but we'll get to those at different points. Teucer. Teucer can only join, particularly FTO Teucer is what we're talking about here. Teucer can only join Harbinger's fire teams. If you want the benefit of +1 special die, you will need two things that count as Harbingers. But hey, if you're taking a Harbinger Lieutenant and a Harbinger Lieutenant Decoy and you're willing to put them somewhat close to one another, there you go. There are two Harbingers to give Teucer a fire team bonus. Now, Teucer is fantastic on his merits: Shock Immune, Mimetism, MSV, Ballistic Skill 14, no wound incapacitation. The reason why you might not take the FTO profile is just that there are other profiles that exist and they have plasma weapons. And a Feuerback is a good weapon, a plasma sniper rifle is an outstanding one. For that reason, basically all of these profiles are very viable. I have just hard lost a game to a Neurokinetics Teucer that refused to lose a face-to-face roll. An active turn Plasma Sniper Teucer is terrifying, and the FTO one splits the difference by having a marginally worse weapon for basically all uses, but 3 dice in active and 2 dice in reactive. A very cool profile, an expensive profile, so not always easy to include, but worth bearing in mind. Now, one of the big limitations of Teucer is that you do really kind of want to make use of smoke shooting with him if you're taking him. He has an MSV2, his stats are fantastic on rate, but they get even better if you're able to fire through smoke, and there's only one source of smoke in the faction. And that leads us to Patrocles, Team Achilles Shadow. Now, Patrocles can be in two different fire teams. He can be in a Team Achilles fire team with Achilles. We'll talk about that when we get to Achilles. Or he can function as the leader of a Shadow fire team And that's where I tend to prefer to use him. Now, you can put Harbingers in this fire team, but more interesting are the inclusion of things like Rain Dancers and Steeljaws, which are irregular troopers that make use of Patroclus' Fire Team Master. There are only 3 models with this skill in the faction. It's very valuable to the faction. And Patroclus is only one of 2 profiles that's any good that has access to it. So there are a bunch of profiles here, but really what we are interested in are the FTO ones, and generally that's going to mean the heavy rocket launcher profile. You will take one of these two. You'll either take Chain of Command or not Chain of Command. He's a specialist regardless, so you only need Chain of Command if, for example, you're taking Achilles. And frankly, even then, at 5 points more for Chain of Command, when you are already a specialist, I'm usually pretty inclined to save the points on the basis that if Achilles dies, I probably lost the game anyway, so let's just suck it up and take the cheapest profile. And for that reason, this Patroclus is the cheapest profile that you can take. It's the one that I take most often, but he does find his way into a lot of my lists because there are things that he does that you just otherwise can't really get in the faction. And the big one, as noted, is smoke grenades, and really quite good smoke grenades. He's Fizz 13, but he's got ballistic skill attack +1 burst natively, which means he's throwing out 2 per attack, and if he's a fire team with duo bonuses, that's 3 dice smoke, which is very reliable. Beyond that, Patroclus is just kind of interestingly, he's almost a fire team in a can by himself. He's got good close combat with Martial Arts 3, CC22, and a serviceable damage 6 DACW. He's got a nano screen, so it's easy for him to move around. He's got smoke, so he can control visibility, and he's a specialist operative. And he's fast at 6-4 movement, which is further aided by the fact that Nano Screen lets him move in straight lines. All of those are really kind of cool, and go a very long way from making up for Patroclus' glaring weakness, which is that he is a hackable, heavy infantry who has no wound incapacitation, but does not have shock immune. I'm informed that that's intentional, but yes, this is a heavy infantry no wounding cap, and one of the only ones in the entire game that can just die to a mine. And that's kind of a problem, but it's a problem I mostly have to accept because he does too many other things that are useful. He's fast close combat with stealth, he's a fire team master, he's a specialist with his own smoke grenades. Like, there's just a lot going on here that is really valuable. He's even burst 3 in 1 special die with the heavy rocket launcher. It's only ballistic skill 13, but hey, sometimes that's enough to get the job done, particularly if you're attacking a target opportunity. Overall, Patroclus is a profile that I really like, but he is a profile that makes some compromises that are just worth bearing in mind. Especially remembering that he's not shock immune is going to save you some agony at some point in one of your games. Now, as a fire team master, he links very naturally with some of our irregular models, and so we're going to start with the first dinosaur that will appear in this video, the Tekdraken Steeljaw. This is one of 2 Tekdrakens. It's the only Tekdraken with a model currently. And in a Shadows fire team, it counts as a Shadow model along with Patroclus, which means Patroclus and a Steeljaw is a duo that gets duo bonuses, and it's one of my favorite duos in the faction. The Tekdraken is irregular, and that is a disadvantage. That's why we take a fire team master to compensate for it. And it's really worth noting when you look at this faction, there are a lot of very cool irregulars. Irregular is not a significant points discount. This faction would just mechanically be a bit better in many cases if it wasn't paying for fire team master and just had regular models. But hey, this is an irregular piece. We can compensate for that. Everything else about the Tekdraken is really cool. This is a melee piece, but what a list of rules and stats. 6-4 move, CC23, Fizz 13, but with dodge -3, which means it dodges really well and it dodges 4 inches when it dodges. Armor 2 BTS 3, that's fine, but it's immune to criticals and it's got 2 wounds. 2 wounds, crit immune, decent defensive stats, mimetism, dodge -3 on a model that's 18 or 19 points is kind of really robust for what you're paying, and so these guys make fantastic roadblocks. They're also really good at dodging around and into close combat, and when they get into close combat, they're pretty good. Martial Arts level 2, CC23, and an armor-piercing viral weapon that's damage 4, which means that if they hit you, they're very dangerous. To help you get into close combat, it's also got Clamming Plus, it's got Terrain Total. Techno-Organic is just a rule that lets it be healed by engineers or doctors or medikits or gizmo kits, not usually super relevant. And then the weapons loadout, there's actually 2 really interesting profiles. There's a profile with a sensor, Flash Pulse Grenades. Don't sleep on grenades, by the way. Spec Fire is really valuable. Grenades, Viral Mine, a boarding pistol, and the Viral CCW, so it's loaded for bear, at least in short range, or a profile that gives up the sensor and the viral mine, but gets an armed turret. It's only 1 point more. Turrets are pretty cool, and in fact, this is one of the only profiles in the game that I would actually consider taking that has a turret, because everything else it's doing is really cool. Especially if you have two Tekdrakens in a team or in a list, usually one sensor is fine, so hey, get a turret back into the lists. Remember turrets? They were really cool. We stopped taking them because they were overcosted on every profile that they were on, but here, if you have 1 point and you've taken two sensor Steeljaws, you could make the upgrade. Now, Steeljaws can join other links in the faction, notably they can join a research fire team, but for my money there's usually a better dinosaur or a more fit for purpose dinosaur that I would like to take in the research fire team, so usually I'll have like one Steeljaw in a list, and it will be playing alongside Patrocles. Patrocles will escort it into the midfield, he'll go and do Patrocles things, maybe he'll stab something, and the Tekdraken's job at that point will just be to be as annoying as possible for my opponent. At 18 points, it's one of the cheaper profiles in the faction. It's not cheap exactly, it's not subsidizing anything exactly, but it's also not taking too much oxygen from other pieces, and so one of them usually very fun to include and usually very annoying for your opponent. Now, the other irregular that can link with Patrocles, and which I'm a bit more loath to recommend, are the Rain Dancer's Light Assault Company. The cheapest one of these costs the same as a Steeljaw, and is not as good as a Steeljaw. Now, there are things about the Rain Dancers that are cool, right? They dodge fairly well, they dodge fairly far, 6-2 move, and genuinely good close combat. A Rain Dancer is better in close combat than Patrocles, right? Better close combat score, martial arts level 3, better DACCW. It's also Mimetism 6, but does not have Frenzy or no cover, which means it's always fully benefiting from that Mimetism. But frankly, these are profiles that would really like to have Frenzy baked in, because they are expensive and single wound and don't really do anything. Like, on paper, this contender profile, for example, is really interesting. It's got Ballistic Skill Attack +1 burst, which means it's a 3-dice contender, which means it goes up to a 4-dice contender in a fire team, with Mimetism -6, and Ballistic Skill 12. And I don't care, because I do not have 20 points spare. I don't even really have 18 points spare in this faction, because I'm taking a Tekdraken first, because it won't die to a chain rifle, unlike a Rain Dancer, which is armor 1 and will. There's just, for me, really no place in the faction for these profiles. Something invariably gets edged out when we're talking about we can only take so many irregulars, they can only join so many fire teams, but more than that, we have to make concessions on points costs around things. There is no space in this faction, in my lists at least, for an 18 to 24 point profile that is kind of okay in close combat, kind of okay at shooting, but which kind of dies immediately the moment that it takes a hit, isn't resilient, and doesn't really contribute to a broader game plan. The fact that if you want to get these things into close combat, you need to source your smoke or zero vis from a 31 point close combat model at cheapest, or a 36 point model otherwise, just really kind of puts the nail in their coffin for me, which is a little bit of a shame because two of these guys come in the starter box. These are one of the profiles at the very end when we'll talk about some things that I might suggest changing about the video. These are one of them, changing about the faction rather, and they're a bit of a weak link, especially as a starter pack offering. Still, if you like them, you can make them work. Usually you'll be looking at linking them with Patrocles. I did, in my first impressions video, really think that this profile here, the forward deploying light shotgun mine layer EM mine, that's a profile that was really compelling, and it would have been really compelling if we had any spare points in this faction. But list building in Next Wave is incredibly tight, and I do not have 23 points for a solo operator who might just run around laying some mines. Still, in terms of Shadow's fire teams, Patrocles and Steeljaws are very playable and will feature in the list at the end of this video. And if the Mimetism and Stealth are compelling to you, Mimetism and Better Martial Arts rather, are compelling to you, you could feasibly cut the Steeljaw for a Rain Dancer and run exactly the same list. Now, from the Shadows Fire team, we jump to the Research Fire team, and these next three profiles are all bangers. I do have one favorite profile in the entire faction that we'll talk about when we get to, but Pandora and the next two profiles we'll talk about are all very close runners-up and very cool. Pandora has always been really cool and interesting, but she's especially valuable in Next Wave. She is modestly affordable, all of her profiles come in at under 30 points, and she does just a ton of work. Now, you can take a chain of command profile, but my preferred profile is the Hacker with the Medikit +1 burst. This is a very efficient profile. Firstly, Medikit +1 burst is a very good way, particularly if you have special die, of reliably medikitting things back, because you can score 2 hits. She's Ballistic Skill 12. It's not too hard to get her rolling 3 dice on 15s looking for 2 hits, which gives you 2 chances to medikit something in one order, which gives you a very good chance of recovering something like, for example, a Stinger. But she's also got a Pulsar, Pitcher, Flash Pulse, and Viral Pistol, all of which means she's not paying for a main firearm like a combi. A combi would blow her points cost out. It doesn't, so 26 points is very cheap. Ballistic Skill 12 Pitcher is excellent. She could even fight at close range. The Viral Pistol +1 burst forks with the Pulsar. Like, all of this is excellent. On top of that, she's probably the best value hacker in the entire faction. She brings her own pitcher, she links, and while she's just a generic hacking device, she's Willpower 14 BTS 3 with no wound incapacitation and the Zero Pain upgrade. And Zero Pain is actually very, very good on her. Because we're often looking to cut corners in this faction, it's not going to be uncommon to take literally just her as my only hacker. I will do that often. And because she's got Zero Pain, she's actually really difficult for opposing killer hackers to dive and try and put her out of commission and nullify my hacking. Because of how good Zero Pain is defensively, and because she's got no wounding cap on top of that, she can just toilet bowl an entire turn's worth of fairly good quality killer hacking and survive, and that is incredibly valuable in a faction where, like I said, often she might be the only hacker that you take. And for that reason, she's one of the few very close to auto-include profiles. I put her in, I think, every single next wave list. I put her in every next wave list. She does so many things that are useful. She's very valuable. She's my force reconstitution because I cannot afford Dr. Worm in this army. She's hugely difficult to kill. Dodge -6 even is hilarious. You are going to be hard pressed to find better value options, and I very, very strongly recommend her. Even if she had just been a good quality hacker with a Ballistic Skill 12 pitcher, that would be worthwhile. But the fact that this profile does so many other things makes her a very, very strong recommend. Now, if you're taking her, you need some things to link her with, and we've got a few really interesting options. Now, the kind of obvious option, and yeah, absolutely, you should probably take this, is the Stinger's Tactical Security Unit. Now, to start with, there is one notable downside of the Stinger, which is that it is very, very single wound. Like a lot of other things in this faction, like I just complained about Rain Dancers, for example, being a profile that takes one hit from a chain rifle and dies. Yep, Stingers are armor 1 and 1 wound. However, with that as a limitation, everything else about these guys is really good, and they're one of the best single wound gunfighters. That's not a category that's like incredibly great, but they're one of the best single wound gunfighters in the game, and the Wraith we just talked about is one of the others. For that reason, there are 2 profiles we're kind of interested in here. And those are the gunfighting profiles. We're looking at either the heavy machine gun or the MSV2 multi-marksman rifle to take advantage of Ballistic Skill 13, BS Stack -3, Mimetism -3, and Warhorse. Just a very, very good gunfighter, and one of the few sources of NCO in this faction. Since we're often taking Harbinger lieutenants who aren't really going to spend their LT order, this is a really valuable rule to have at least one of. On top of all of that, Stinger's duo Pure with Pandora, both of them count as research. And so just by themselves, for example, a HMG Stinger and Pandora, 56 points, but it's a pure duo that gunfights, has a hacker, does network projection, has force reconstitution, very valuable. Now, which of these 2 you prefer is really going to be kind of a meta choice. How much value are you getting from the MSV2, and is it enough to make up for how much of a better gun in a vacuum a HMG usually is? The HMG's got significant range band advantages. It's a more dangerous. It's damage 5, which means that unless armor piercing is unless you're hitting armor 6 or higher, the HMG's rounds are more dangerous. The HMG is barely any more expensive. It is for that reason my default profile, but you want to leave the door open to the MSV2 multi-marksman just in case there are certain things that you expect. If you expect to have to fight into a lot of mimetism, and especially into mimetism 6, if you're taking Patrocles and can smoke shoot, you might consider changing back to a Stinger multi-marksman. For that, always hitting on 13s. Yes, it's got the MSV. Make maximum use of your mods. Win face-to-face rolls and worry about damaging things later. Again, I prefer the HMG, but this is a very good profile as well, and well worth considering. Either way, Stinger plus Pandora is an excellent duo that you can bolt further things to. And my preferred further thing to bolt to that duo is a Tekdraken Blackheart. Now, you can actually get away if you really want to. If you want to absolutely dinosaur max, you can cut a Stinger because 2 Blackhearts can go in a fire team with Pandora. She's a fire team master, remember, so the fact that it's a regular doesn't matter. You can go Pandora, Blackheart, Blackheart, and that's a duo with 2 Blackhearts in it, so it gets the bonus that way. Very viable. The Stinger is perhaps a little more elegant, a little more clean, makes the NCO use. It's a slightly better longer range gunfighter, but give that consideration. Now, Tech Black and Blackhearts, one of my probably 4 favorite models in the faction, or profiles in the faction. In fact, no, let's say top 3. There's exactly one profile that is more standout than the Tekdraken, but the Blackheart is absolutely fantastic. Now, a lot of what we'll see here is kind of common with the Steeljaw. We can see a fairly similar profile. In this case, we've got Ballistic Skill 13, but lower close combat, but Armor 2, BTS 3, Mimetism, Immunity Critical. This is a robust profile. It is hard to put a Tekdraken down. The closest thing to a limitation it has is that it is only armor 2, but the vitality, the BTS, the immunity to critical, the mimetism makes these guys really difficult to one-shot, and Pandora's sitting right behind one of these with a Medikit +1 burst. Okay, so they're durable. What else do we have going on? Well, Discover +3 is nice to have, and Ballistic Skill Attack +1 burst native on every profile. That's particularly interesting because these guys have got an absolute kitchen sink of guns. Every single one of them has an EMARAT and an AP heavy pistol. Okay, so it's good at short range. How about long range? Got you covered there as well. Every single profile has some kind of long range weapons, but at minimum a Panzerfaust. Now, a Panzerfaust is not, under almost any circumstance, an active turn gun. But when you are Ballistic Skill 13, Mimetism 3, Ballistic Skill Attack +1 burst, and in a fire team, a Panzerfaust is a 3-dice autocannon. Now, sure, you've got to reload before you can take a second shot, but if you have enough Tekdraken Blackhearts in a list, you can have all of them fire off those Panzerfausts in active turn as a volley of ultra-high damage weapons at very long range. Like, don't sleep on the fact that a Panzerfaust in the hands or perhaps claws of a Tekdraken is a genuinely viable active turn gun. And it doesn't stop there. We haven't even gotten to their primary armaments. Contender? That's fine. Multi-marksman? That's fine. Plasma carbine? Hot damn, this is a plasma carbine on a +1 burst ballistic skill attack profile with Ballistic Skill 13 and Mimetism. That slaps, and there's a Thunderbolt AP profile as well if you want longer range weapons. I steer away from Thunderbolt AP actually, because I would rather just take more Tekdrakens and use their Panzerfausts. But damn, like just this profile here, it's excellent at basically every range out to 32 inches. It's got an EMARAT AP heavy pistol or EMARAT Panzer carbine, plasma carbine for close range, Panzerfaust for long range, and on top of all of that, the damn thing has a viral mine dispenser as well. It can be linked easily, which means you get special die on that mine dispenser, and just viral on a mine dispenser is such a big deal. Think about a fire team that is a Stinger, and a Tekdraken Blackheart and Pandora. Okay, now that's not cheap, right? This is where we start getting into the expensive things in Next Wave, but none of those profiles is more than 30 points. And you've got both the Tekdraken and the Stinger for long-range gunfighting. You've got the Stinger as well, figuring short-range gunfighting, or the Tekdraken Blackheart Plasma Carbine for short-range gunfighting. It can fight just fine, and Pandora can press buttons or medikit back either of them that fall over. Then you get into just the equipment that it can dispense, because you can have Pandora firing off her pitches and then the Blackheart firing off the Mine Dispenser Viral, and there's actually a really interesting synergy there, because viral mines at worst are shock mines that target BTS, but anything that has wounds is going to really fear that viral ammunition. 2 hits against BTS, even if it's just damage 7, is scary. Lots of things that literally can't die to a shock mine literally can die to a viral mine. There's a massive lethality difference. Models that might be like, you know what, I'm just going to try and spang this shock hit. I'm armor 2, I need to roll a 9, worst case scenario, I die, but hey, maybe I'm cheap. Viral mines will almost always clean them up. There's just a massive lethality difference, and the few things, like those things in the game that aren't too worried about viral because they have structure, most of those are hackable, which means that if you lay down a network of viral mines and pitches, it's going to be shockingly rare that your opponent will have an easy way to punch that out. Best case scenario, they have to send through some cheap irregular stuff, and even the cheap irregular stuff is much more likely to die to the viral mines. And if they don't have that option, they can just be in a world of hurt. So the total package here, this is probably my second favorite profile in the entire army, especially the Plasma Carbine version. Plasma is awesome. Auto cannons, which is what this Panzerfaust is, are awesome. Its close range is excellent, and I will always make great use of that mine dispenser. Fantastic multi-role firepower piece, one of the defining profiles for next wave. Love it to bits, and my proxies for these guys are well on the way to being painted. Now, from the Research Fire team, and with a moment of whiplash, we go to the Dragon Fire team, and this is probably the weakest of the Fire Team Masters in the form of Drachios, Team Achilles Dragon. Now, I'm going to indulge myself a little bit here and say that everyone should be allowed to have one profile in Infinity that they just kind of hate without reservation, that they don't need to provide a reason for, they just think sucks. And for me, Drachios is that profile. You can make an argument for this guy these days. Like, he's got 2 vitality. That alone is a really big deal because he used to be possibly one of the worst profiles in the entire game, and they just slapped an entire second wound onto him. But in fact, it says something about how much of a trash bag profile he was that slapping an entire wound onto him isn't enough, at least in my eyes, to make him any fucking good. But, in the interest of fairness, let's just call out a few things. Firstly, he is a Fire Team Master. That's relevant. We can have him Fire Team Master. Some Steel Jaws, but not, it should be noted, Blackhearts. I like Steel Hearts. I like Steel Jaws. I like Blackhearts a lot more. Drachios can only Fire Team Master with Steel Jaws. Drachios, you suck. Now, being a specialist operative is nice. His close combat is bad. In fact, it's just good enough to be expensive, but CC21 and Martial Arts Level 1 is not getting you anywhere in a hurry. He will lose to CC experts, and he will struggle to bully non-CC experts, and he's not a particularly good gunfighter. Albedo -6 is a relevant skill, but he's only ballistic skill 13, and mostly he's trying to blaze away with either a Red Fury or a Mark 12, and those are kind of expensive weapons. 33 points is not cheap for this guy. Now, inasmuch as he has a niche, and he has a very small niche, it is worth noting that he's one of the pieces that can form part of a Team Achilles Fire team, where he complements Achilles by giving pure duo bonuses. Normally you would reach for Patrocles, but there is an argument for Drachios, and that argument basically is both Patrocles and Drachios are specialists, which is a valuable thing to add to Achilles. Now, I like Patrocles because he is the same speed as Achilles and he has smoke, but Drachios has 2 things going for him over Patrocles that make him potentially a better consideration. The first is Albedo actually has some synergy with Achilles. Achilles is a mimetism gunfighter. Combining a mimetism gunfighter with an Albedo gunfighter kind of has some interesting things going on. Now, in practice, if you run the math, any firefight that you might consider putting a Drachios in, like tag me in, chief, and putting Drachios in instead of Achilles, Achilles is probably actually just better at that gunfight because he's Achilles and Drachios is Drachios, but it is something to consider. The other reason, and this is the most significant one, is that Drachios is a medium infantry. Sometimes you're going to need that fire team to go and kill a pitcher so that Achilles can move forward, and Drachios does that better than Patrocles. Patrocles is hackable, Drachios is not. Now, that's an incredibly thin margin in which to make a recommendation for a piece, and in the interest of fairness, we are going to make that recommendation. Consider linking Drachios with Achilles if you're running Achilles, or alternatively, you can just share my opinion that everyone is allowed to have one profile that they unreservedly think sucks, and that profile is Drachios. Drachios, I hate your stupid face, your art is dumb, why are you silhouette 5, but you do have a use case duoed with Achilles. And with that, let's talk about Achilles. The tag that walks like a man. This is, pound for pound, probably one of the best top-end profiles in the entire game. He's not even egregiously expensive. 62 or 63 points for what you get is kind of a steal. That's cheaper than most tags for a model that is as durable as and as dangerous as and in many respects better than and is smaller than most tags. Everything about this profile is premium. He's 6'4" move, he's CC 24 with martial arts 4, which means that he absolutely just cranks with that damage 5 explosive post-combat weapon. There are a few models in the game that can threaten Achilles, but in terms of ability to just punch down, he will go into basically any non-expert CC and blow it out in one go. Very easy for him to inflict 8 saves in one attack, and that's enough to one-shot most main battle tags. Ballistic skill 15 with your choice of an AP Spitfire or X-Visor plasma rifle. I am actually genuinely not sure which of these two I prefer. I think the general consensus is coming down to plasma, and certainly I am a very, very plasma enjoyer person. But this is something I would actually encourage most people, once they start playing with Achilles, just spend time with both profiles. You will come to a conclusion about which you prefer. Again, personally, I love plasma. I will use it whenever I can, but I do really think there is a time and place where 4 dice is going to be a little bit better, and Achilles maneuvers so effectively because he's 6'4 with a nano screen that often you can arrange gunfights where nobody is in cover in any case, in which case the lethality bonus that a plasma weapon enjoys by being a template begins to diminish a little bit. So just try these two. The plasma rifle is better at longer ranges, but again, do you really want to be taking 0 range band options that option? Well, hey, he's Ballistic Skill 15, Mimetism 3, so maybe you do. He's got Stealth, he's got Frenzy. Frenzy is strictly advantageous because he's a nanoscreen model with no cover anyway, and he's got forward deployment as well. Often you'll take this guy as your lieutenant with a kind of if he dies I lose the game anyway attitude. He will be telegraphed in that respect because there's only one willpower 15 lieutenant profile in the army, but you take Achilles, you make him your reserve drop, you go first, and then you just kill your opponent on the first turn. There are lots of events that have been won that way. Now, there are also lots of events and lots of games that haven't. I always have this weird skepticism where, like, every time someone wins Interplanetario by just blowing everyone out with Achilles, I kind of wonder what the deal is there. Because even in the hands of very, very good players, people should be equally capable of defending at the high level of play. I've never quite squared that circle to my own satisfaction, but the evidence absolutely exists that at the low end of play and the high end of play, if you want to engineer a blowout breakthrough and kill your opponent on the first turn, one of the best pieces in the game to do that is Achilles. I don't personally use him terribly much because he doesn't fit the playstyle that I like. I like to maximize my chances of not losing the game before I try and invest heavily in things that win me the game, and Achilles is the opposite of that philosophy. Especially in a faction like Next Wave, where the underlying infrastructure does not afford too much else in your list once you take a 63-point profile. Achilles is the list building equivalent of going all in on red, but it's a gamble that pays off consistently, and he's very strong. If you are playing Next Wave, if you're getting into Next Wave, and you're kind of thinking, I'm going to play this for a long time, one of the profiles that you will spend time with and explore 100% is Achilles because he's one of the defining factional strengths. Now, just to round out this section, when we're talking about linked teams, even though these guys are often more likely to be solo operators, we've got 2 more profiles to talk about before we get into 2.5, before we get into some other things, and there are still plenty of other things to discuss. And the first of those is Ironsides. These guys are very expensive and very cool and weirdly important to the faction. Now, the total profile here is fine. Move 6-2 is cool. Ballistic Skill 13 is a little bit dispiritingly average. Armor 3 BTS 6 is nice, and it's a 2-wound combat heavy infantry. It's hackable. Techno-organic, again, technically means it can be repaired by an engineer, which you might take advantage of at some point. But really the big thing here is that these are a gunfighting profile which has 2 profiles that are very important to the army. The first is the multi-rifle. It can be either a lieutenant or a non-lieutenant, light flamethrower with disco. This is the only disco in the entire damn faction, and so as much as there is almost no circumstance in any other army in this game where I would go, yeah, I'm going to take an unlinked multi-rifle for 36 points, sometimes you just need visibility control. And so the Disco Baller is worth considering just for that purpose. And hey, Tactical Awareness and Lieutenant, that thing's got 3 orders it's generating by itself, 2 of which it can spend very freely in any given turn. That's pretty okay. The other equally important thing though, is just the AP heavy machine gun. Not so much because it's an AP heavy machine gun. In fact, frankly, I wish that it wasn't because it's so goddamn expensive. I would almost rather there was a regular HMG with like +1 damage. But the big deal here is Albedo, ballistic skill attack -3, serviceable burst, serviceable ballistic skill. Albedo, as much as I ragged on Drachios for being crap, Albedo is a weirdly valuable skill or piece of equipment in this army. Look back at the gunfighters we've covered previously. Blackhearts have mimetism. Stingers have mimetism. Wraiths have mimetism. When we get to the Skyhound, it's got mimetism. Achilles has mimetism. This is a faction where an MSV bypasses a huge number of negative modifiers across a huge number of profiles. And for that reason alone, an actual credible non-Drachios Albedo gunfighter, which also has base attack -3, is really useful. This is a -6 modifier that you can apply to many pieces that don't otherwise suffer too many negative modifiers from your army. Now, do I wish it was cheaper? Yes. Can I always afford 44 points? Absolutely not. But it is a profile to be aware of just because of how it fits in with everything else. Particularly in a two-list format, this is a profile that you just might want to consider because it shores up weaknesses mechanically that exist in the faction and which you would otherwise have to grapple with. Finally, technically linkable before we get into one notable wildcard, the Juggernaut Armored Assault category. It can only get pure duos from linking with another Juggernaut, and if you do that, power to you. But hey, this guy is the main battle tag for this faction. And I love it, and I will probably never play it again because damn, I can't afford that many points in this army. Which is just too expensive. 81 points, I'll just take Achilles. Achilles exists. I'm sorry, that's what we're playing instead. But if we set that aside, this guy's really cool. Like, this is one of my favorite profiles in the game, and if you airdropped this thing into almost any other faction, I would play it a lot because it's very cool. And the reason why it's very cool is that it's highly mobile, it's 8-2 with climbing plus, all of the other main battle tag benefits that you would usually expect. It's remote presence, so it's either repairable, and it's got a multi-heavy machine gun, NCO, and guard. And guard is awesome. It's just a very dangerous, very powerful skill because you can roll up with your gun and you kind of just force people to stare you down. They can't declare close combat, but if they do, if they declare close combat, you shoot them. And if they don't declare close combat, you get a very, very dangerous CC attack, 2 dice on 22s, against a roll that is not itself using a CC stat, which means it's usually going to be rolling something like 1 dice on 15s. Cool. 2 on 22s with a damage 4 DACCW. Very, very cool, very mobile, very dangerous. It's durable. It's even techno-organic, so in a pinch we can medikit it, although Phys 12, just bear that in mind. But ultimately, shockingly unaffordable in this faction. There are occasional lists that you will see pop up that can make use of the Juggernaut. You have to really compromise to fit it in. The model I personally think is incredible, I love it, and I use it as a proxy for something else. Still, it can be made to work, and so if you wanted to dive into it, it's worth doing. Also, personally, I do not take the plasma rifle +1 burst, but if you are confident in your tables giving you the ability to close without using smoke inside of 16 inches, this is an incredibly dangerous profile. Like, this is going to really crack open a defense if you close, and there's no hacking, and you can get in under the range band. Maybe you just use your armor and structure to do it. This is shockingly dangerous. This is a 4 dice ballistic skill 14 plasma weapon that is combined with guard. That's incredibly cool. I just don't know if I consider that reliable much of the time. And the only disco in this faction is 36 points, which I have taken alongside a Juggernaut. Lord knows I have tried to make that work, and the rest of the list was so thin as to almost, but not quite, be unbearable. Love the model. Personal recommendation is most of the time when we get to the Skyhound, just use your Juggernaut as a Skyhound. Now, we've got one last wild card to discuss, and it's actually kind of a wild card in multiple senses, and that's the Gearheads Tech Savant team. This is probably one of the best profiles in the entire faction, but really I consider it to be a gateway to the actual best profile in the entire faction. Still, what have we got here? This is mostly just a kind of cheaper line infantry dude who can wildcard into any fire teams. Never counts as anything, that's fine. The FTOs are all okay. There is a relatively cheap engineer that we will never take, there's a hacker that we will occasionally take, and there's a tag com that we would only take if we were taking a Juggernaut, but which you might consider under those circumstances. It is a mine layer with cyber mines, which is very cool, but it's not a specialist or anything, so you'd usually leave this at home. The hacker is one of the more interesting hackers that I nevertheless tend to cut from my lists. Now, on rate, this is really nice. It has a firewall with firewall -6, and it has a pitcher, and it can join links, at which point it's a linked pitcher and a specialist. That all sounds very good until we consider that most of the time, that same role for me is being filled by Pandora, and Pandora plays weirdly badly with other hackers. When your opponent, like if your opponent stage dives your repeater network, the natural thing to do, like if an anathematic goes knock knock who's there and walks into your repeater area, very common is that Pandora wants to live, and so she will declare Zero Pain. Zero Pain is a passive ARO, which means the anathematic gets to go, okay, cool, 4 dice into the gearhead. And so if you want them to have to split burst, then Pandora has to expose herself, at which point Pandora gets full blast because she's the more dangerous piece. Because she is kind of selfish in ARO, she doesn't really want any other hackers because other hackers tend to be vulnerable inside your network. For that reason, after a few games using them, I stopped using Gearhead FTO hackers, although if you don't find that's a problem locally, if you're not dealing with real Apex hackers, or you want to just try and saturate through stuff like, for example, military orders hacking, where you can just put two hackers on different parts of the table, and at least both of them will be somewhat resilient, the Gearhead is okay in that role though. The more important gizmo kits, so more important gearheads, are these two non-FTO profiles. You can take the engineer if you have points, more often you won't, because you don't have points, the cyberplug. Now, all this does is open up cyberplug peripheral profiles. Okay, cool. Are they that good? Yes. They're the best profiles in the entire faction. Specifically this thing. Sartroids, Puzzlers. These are the best profiles in the entire faction, and they are my favorite profile in Infinity N5. There's a lot of competition for that slot. There's a lot of competition in just this faction for that slot, but the Puzzler, Hidden Deployment, there is no profile that I have had more like vicious goblin fun with than this thing. And you can have two of them connected to one gearhead, and I do that because why would I not? These things are incredible. People who've been around long enough, who played in like 3rd edition, might remember the old Libertos. Like a Libertos has been nerfed every edition since it was released, and it was released in an environment where the overall power level was lower. Libertos had this ability to just toilet bowl the entire game for your opponent because you would dodge and then you would succeed and it dodged really well and it would get somewhere that had a template weapon. And I once watched one of the best players in the country using a Hollow Man, full person Hollow Man link to try and pin down a Libertos, and they were just a profile that could overperform. They cost almost nothing, and they tended to just randomly do incredibly, and they have faded since then. They have become much more reasonable in N4, and especially in N5. A Libertos is merely good. It's a nice profile to have. But that energy has re-emerged with the Sartroid. Now, it's 12 points, and it's a hidden deployment peripheral. However, to note, connected and autonomous profiles. There is a bunch of rules here. You will need to go and have a look at the peripheral cyberplug rules to fully understand them. There's a ton going on. But the short version is, most of the time, you will have the connected profile. If the gearhead dies, or if two Sartroids connected by one gearhead are arrowing at the same time, one of them will have to use the autonomous profile. That doesn't matter terribly much for a puzzler, because it's broadly the weapons and the skills that are the big deal, but do bear that in mind. If the gearhead dies, you will suffer some stat degradation, but for now, let's just assume most of the time you'll get the benefit of the connected profile. And what a piece of work this is. Hidden deployment, infiltration. Okay, that's pretty good. No camouflage, but hidden deployment, infiltration. A 2 move, Emarat, deployable repeater, stun pistol, Parasis W, acrylic cologne. This is a hidden deployment Emarat. That's really good. That's really good just by itself. I would pay 12 points just about for that, but on top of all of that, it's weirdly difficult to kill because it's got dodge +3 on Fizz 10 and mimetism. So just occasionally you'll roll the 13 and dodge 4 inches. And then there'll be an Emarat in some place your opponent didn't want. This will happen after you emerge from hidden deployment to fire your Emarat, by the way. Like, invariably, at some point during the game, your two Sartroids will appear and lay down an Emerat template, and your opponent will just have a momentary out-of-body experience as they now have to solve this problem. And then trying to deal with the damn thing after that is a huge pain. You almost have to shoot it when it reveals, and just accept that your important heavy infantry link in the midfield is now bricked, because if you don't, it will start dodging. And you have to dodge if it's going to Emerat template you. If you don't, it starts dodging. Like if you're shooting it from downtown, and if it dodges it successfully, it moves 4 inches, which makes the Emerat more annoying. That as a reactive tool is incredibly good, but it's also good in active because it's 8-2 move with surprise attack -6 and the tools to benefit from that. Now, tragically, since the last update, the Emerat does not benefit from surprise attack. Not the end of the world, however, much of the time if you present an Emerat in active turn, your opponent will respond with a dodge, in which case you have either a +1 burst surprise attack infinity stun pistol, or more likely the para CCW. Para CCWs do benefit from surprise attack, which means you're applying a -6 modifier, -12 modifier rather, against a dodging enemy, which means you almost always get into close combat, tie something down, and land the para CCW. On top of all of that, it's some of the best network projection in Faction, because it starts on the 24-inch line, moves 8, and laser deployable repeater. If you want to do missile play, your opponent can't stop you from landing this thing. Like, these guys are so good. They're so good. They're so fun. For a profile that is literally unable to do damage. Like, the only way this could ever kill something is by performing a coup de grace. In any other circumstance, it's literally impossible for the Sartroid to kill something. I am normally deeply outspoken against assuming that profiles that are primarily non-lethal are auto-includes, right? Like, remember Miranda Rushcroft? Remember how at the beginning of N5, every single person was frothing over her and insisting she was auto-include? Seen her recently? I sure haven't. You? And the reason for that is that as good as Ashcroft is, she's fundamentally a non-lethal profile. There are also many things that kind of counter her, and she's not cheap. This is a non-lethal profile, but just everything it does is disruptive and chaotic. Oh, also, by the way, Armor 3 BTS 6. Like, just randomly, if you do hit this thing, it just survives a lot. I love Sartroids. If you are playing Next Wave, find a proxy for them that you like, because in almost any scenario, I recommend taking a Gearhead and 2 of them. Like, just do it. They're so fun. They are a major selling point for this faction, and my favorite profile in Infinity. Now, there is technically another kind of Sartroid, and because you can take 2 Gearheads, you can take a second 13-point Gearhead and have 1 or 2 of these connected. That starts getting very expensive, but the Ranters are not bad. By the way, in case I didn't mention it, these things are peripherals. They don't generate orders, but they don't take troop slots, which means you can have a 19-trooper next wave army. It's going to be thin on the ground otherwise, but I do generally take 2, sometimes 3 of these things in lists, because I love myself some goblins. The Ranters are just ballistic skill attack dudes, and they are a little expensive for what are fundamentally single wound, non-order generating peripherals, but kind of solid. What we have here is forward deployment rather than infiltration, no camouflage or hidden deployment, but mimetism -6, ballistic skill 13 in their connected profile. That's pretty sound, particularly when they're Armor 3 BTS 6, and the weapon choices here are cool. Now, frankly, sheer economy just usually forces me to take the submachine gun Thunderbolt. It doesn't take active turn shots particularly often. Sometimes it makes use of this 6-4 move to bring the submachine gun into range, but more often it's just an annoying Thunderbolt arrow that goes into suppressive fire. That's most of what I find this thing doing. On a very small number of occasions, I have run the Spitfire, and it slapped because it was a ballistic skill 13 mimetism 6 Spitfire on an armor 3 BTS 6 6-4 chassis. Like, it's awesome, but it's 19 points. It's 19 points that you have to spend outside of your 15 troopers. It's expensive. Can't afford it very often in Combined Army, can't afford it very often in Next Wave, particularly since I've already taken at that point in Combined Army 1 Puzzler and in Next Wave 2 Puzzlers, but they are a fun and cool profile and they're worth exploring. Much less important to how the faction pays than Puzzlers, but still cool and interesting on their own merits. If you want to just splash around, try the Submachine Gun Thunderbolt. If you want to see how much damage they can actually do, take the Spitfire. Now from there, being cognizant of time, we'll jump into our more actual independent units and we'll move relatively quickly here, because I don't think these guys are really the stars of the show. The stars of the show generally in Next Wave are all of the peripherals and all of the things that you can link, but there is some cool stuff here. And Cliff Jumper's Extreme Jump Unit are really solid. They're one of the better drop troops in the game. They're not aggressively costed. The most expensive is 23 points, 21 points is affordable, and they have native ballistic skill attack +1 burst and mimetism -3. That makes them very sound gunfighters, and they land on 13s, which is excellent. These are really quite efficiently costed models, and actually to the point of it being a little bit like, you're playing with the maths here a little bit, because Fizz 10, Combat Jump 13, Dodge +3 is like, oh really? So not Fizz 13 then, because that would cost points, but hey, I'll take it, something that is relatively efficient. Any of these three profiles is very playable if you want to use it. It's got all of the usual benefits that this kind of jump troop has. We're familiar with this archetype by now. My personal preference is probably the most expensive, the Killer Hacker profile, just because it's a Killer Hacker, and those are a little thin on the ground in this faction. It's also a Burst 4 submachine gun, Burst 2 Zapper with D-charges, which means it gunfights at close range just fine. And if you want to do some killer hacking, it's one of the few ways to do it. Now, just be aware that if you're going to do things right, if you're going to try and kill a hack with this in conjunction with like Pandora, you have to first have it combat jump onto the board or parachutes onto the board, then lay the pitches, then activate it, which is a very convoluted order of operations. The reason being that if you lay the pitcher first, the opponent hacker will get to ARO you when you combat jump. So don't do that, but provided you can manage that and just live with the, oh, Pandora missed both her pitches, guess I have to reload. As long as you can live with that as a possible point of failure, just a very good profile. It's a good specialist, it's fast, it can do a whole bunch of classifieds, D-charges are valuable, there are many scenarios, or there is a scenario that's really useful to have D-charges in the form of corporate appropriation. Just a good and cool profile if you can afford it. Similar, but I can't afford it, are Contrabandoleros, the only skirmisher in Next Wave. There's a lot of things that are cool here, but where the Cliff Jumper is a very lean profile, the Contrabandolero is very bloated. In this case, Dodge +3 is not a valuable skill, Shock Immunity is expensive, Infiltration Fizz equals 16, no idea what they're paying for that, but they're paying something. Lots and lots of things add up here, and end with a, even though this is, right, a hidden deployment zapper. I spent a long time just now talking about how cool hidden deployment Emirats were. Well, those hidden deployment Emirats at 12 points don't cost me an order when they die. The Contrabandolero does not have that advantage. Infiltrate Fizz equals 16 is really cool, but a 13 is still not necessarily easy to roll, and failure yeets an almost 30-point model back to your deployment zone. For me, ultimately, this is a profile or a selection of profiles that are really cool, and which I can't take. I can't afford these. I have to make cuts somewhere in my army. If I'm going to spend points on something like this, I will just spend fewer points on what is probably a better profile in the form of the Cliff Jumper. These guys are just ultimately outcompeted, which is a shame because one of them comes in the starter box, but hey, so does a Cliff Jumper, so that's something. My recommendation is that you use the Contrabandolero in your starter box as a gearhead, because she's an awesome sculpt and she legit looks like she could be a gearhead, and get use out of her that way, because gearheads are very, very useful and Contrabandoleros fundamentally just a bit too expensive most of the time. Also expensive, but ultimately definitely playable, is the vehicle in Next Wave, the Skyhound Combat and Recon Air Squadron. Now, I did a video just recently on all vehicles in Infinity, and the Skyhound ranked as the second best vehicle in the game by my metrics, and I stand by that. And even then, on rate, if you were to compare it in a vacuum and set aside the faction context, it would probably be the best vehicle in the game, because this thing is pushed. 8-2 move, sure, it's got all of the usual vehicle stuff. It has the highest ballistic skill of any vehicle, ballistic skill 14, and some of the better survivability with all of the usual dodge -3, mimetism -6, armor 4, BTS 6. It's actually durable enough to kind of count as if it had armor, which sets it apart from things like, for example, the Go Pod. And the weapon profile here is really interesting. Usually you will splurge for the 33.1, which is affordable. And what you get for that is a +1 burst plasma carbine, +1 burst AP thunderbolt, and mine dispenser. Technically the mine dispenser also has +1 burst, but that does nothing to a mine dispenser. That's really solid. On top of that, it's got Discover +6, just to add a little bit of utility if the Mine Dispenser wasn't utility enough. This is a very, very good piece that would probably be cracked in any other faction, but is only kind of an okay fit in Next Wave. And the reason for that is that vehicles are high variance. Because they're Silhouette 7 and can't take cover, any vehicle, like it doesn't matter how good at the game you are, any vehicle runs the risk of just ending up in a position where it is, because of the table, which you didn't control setup of, a bit too easy to have line of sight drawn to it. And because it can't take cover, if your opponent has a suitable gun, these guys can just go all the way to dead in one order in your opponent's first turn, and sometimes it's just very hard to stop that. Not impossible, but ultimately, particularly if we're talking about 3 or 5 round events, which is kind of the context I think in when I'm talking about Infinity, sometimes you're at the mercy of the table. Now, that's not the end of the world, right? A Skyhound, like it's also a vehicle that can't take cover. Sometimes it just dies in ARO because Armor 4 is not any more durable than Armor 1, and we wouldn't call an Armor 1 heavy infantry durable, like for example. Yep. Vehicles have this propensity for either being incredibly good because they are 8-2 move with super jump 3 and this damn thing has ballistic skill 14 plasma and it just blows your opponent out. Anything that it can jump up to and see and plunging fire into it kills, or an intruder reveals and one-shots it. Those are the two possible outcomes. Like those are the two extreme ends of performance for a Skyhound. And in most other factions, that risk, like that juice is worth the squeeze. These days, since they got buffed, most vehicles are about the cost where they don't degrade the rest of your list enough that the worst case scenario from them is game ending. And that is still just about true for the Skyhound, but Next Wave is a faction where that really is a little harder to tolerate. In any other faction, if you slammed a Skyhound in, you would just windmill slam it into every list because it's incredible. And its high watermark is so high, even if its low watermark is still the vehicle standard of, well, it died. And there's only really one vehicle in the game, which is the best vehicle in the game, in my opinion, that doesn't suffer from that, either because it's a Silhouette 2 combat jump remote doesn't appear until it's time for it to appear, or the Hackislam one, which has 3 wounds and an escape system, and so eclipses itself out and leaves behind a model, etc. The Skyhound has the usual vehicle vulnerabilities, and Next Wave just doesn't have enough fat in the list to tolerate losing potentially a 33-point model to some bad luck or a bad table. But it is so good on rate that you will sometimes take that risk anyway, and anyone who does put Skyhounds in their lists is not by any stretch of the imagination doing it wrong. It's just a risk to be aware of. If you are taking a Skyhound, you're rolling the dice a bit, but the payoff is really, really high. And we got to use that Juggernaut model for something, and God knows I'm not taking a Juggernaut, and this is the only other Silhouette 7 model in the entire army, so thank God it's a really good Silhouette 7 profile. I like Skyhounds a lot. I'm just going to call them, as I so often do, a bit of a sometimes food. Now, just a couple of other things to talk about before we close this video out with some things I would change about Next Wave and a sample list. And we need to just talk about the Sasha Xenotech Hunter and the Glyph Warcore Hegemony Journalist. In no other faction focus have I talked about these kind of random plebs. There is basically no other army where I have taken time to talk about a war core, but this is Next Wave. And we have a single regular model that costs less than 11 points, and that's an AVA-1 R-Drone, and so inevitably you have to pad your list out somehow, and there are no warbands that are cheap in this faction. And so you're going to take usually one or both of a Warcore or a Sasha. Now, over a lot of games, the conclusion I've come to is try not to take both. 2 irregulars, particularly when you've got fire team masters and other stuff happening and you're forming links and all of these things, it's genuinely difficult to bear 2 irregular models, and you will basically never spend the Warcore's order. Like, yes, sometimes maybe, but as soon as you have 2 of these guys, one of them tends to actually just become a dead profile, one of them is manageable. And since you're going to take one, I would usually recommend a Sacha. My understanding is that she will stay in Next Wave after this season. I believe she's meant to be a Next Wave native model, so you're not selling yourself short or anything there. And she's 6 points and she's useful. She's a specialist operative, she forward deploys, she randomly high rolls with booty. Mostly she's a forward deploying specialist. Every turn, spend her irregular, move her towards an objective, press her at some point. That does something for 6 points. And if you want to get to 14 or 15 troops, you've got to make compromises somewhere. You have to take this profile a lot of the time. My just recommendation, why I'm mentioning it, is don't take both. It just ends up being a bit too awkward. And finally, just to mention it, M-drones. This will make sense when I talk about the list that we go through at the end of this video, but an M-drone is a rare, cheap source of tactical awareness. It's a specialist, it has a bunch of really useful rules. This kind of profile is really good. One of the great things about many Pan-Oceanian factions is the access to a linkable tactical awareness sensor drone, and while the Pathfinder is cheaper, we get the same thing here. The link is awkward, it only appears in a single control fire team, but you can link an M-drone, and even if you don't, Attack Aware Specialist Sensor Repeater Deactivator is valuable, especially in this faction. There are so few things in this army that are less than 20 points that 18 points by comparison feels cheap. And so, although I wouldn't normally cover like remote staples because they're in so many factions, people should be familiar with them, I'm going to specifically call out the M drone just because this is a faction where this represents actually, by law of averages, kind of a cheap model that does a great many things. And that segues us into our list to just about close out the video. Now, there are too many different ways you can build Next Wave for me to really do anything other than just show off what it is that I like. There are lots of different things that could be included here. We haven't included the Harbinger Wraith FTO. We haven't included a Skyhound. You could easily cut some stuff from this list and include both, and in fact, I would almost recommend that. But this is a list that I have enjoyed too much. It features in at least one battle report on this channel, and because I love it, I'm going to showcase it. But just to call out, you could very easily make some changes here to include some of those different pieces. From the top, what we have is Patrocles duoed with a Steeljaw. Since a Steeljaw, it's useful. Patrocles, it's a source of visibility control and a fire team in a can. We've got the Pandora Stinger Blackheart team. The Blackheart is providing its Panzerfaust, Contender, Emerat, and Mine Dispenser. Pandora is providing her pitcher, all of those usual wonderful things, and the Stinger is a great gunfighter. We've got the two Harbingers, Lieutenant and a Decoy, a Sacha and an R-Drone. This team is 9 orders, but one of them is going to be irregular, 2 of them will be made regular by Fire Team Masters, and there's an NCO. Group 2 has no Fire Team Master, but does still run a Fire Team. You'll have to use some command tokens here, and it's running the M-Drone Tactical Awareness in a Control Fire Team with 2 Plasma Carbine Blackhearts. Go and watch the battle report that I did on Next Wave to see how this team works, but I love this team. It is so fun, it is so interesting, it is so funny, it spews out so many mines, it gunfights in so many different ways, and it moves around the board effectively and interestingly. There is a learning curve to making this work because often you will break these out and then have them rejoin. Tactical awareness helps with that. This is a fantastic fire team, and Blackhearts are fantastic pieces. And then 2 Ichadrons, a Gearhead, and 2 Puzzlers. I've said enough about Puzzlers. They are wonderful, and they round this list out very nicely. This is a list that has just enough of everything and lots of some really cool stuff. It has enough gunfighting. It's got 3 Blackhearts and a Stinger and Patrocles in a pinch. That's a fair bit of long-range firepower if you're willing to fire these Panzerfaust off inactive. And because you've got 3 Blackhearts, you can do so. You can just take 3 different gunfights, fire off 3 burst, 3 autocannons, and then reload after that if you have to. It's got smoke, it's got just enough specialists. Sasha, Patrocles, Pandora, and then the M-Drone should be enough to see you through any scenario. It's got 2 Puzzlers because they are fantastic. It's got a load of wounds. There are like 5 multi-wound models in this faction, or in this army, and Pandora with her medikit can recover all of them. It's got as many orders as I can fit into a next wave list with 1 tactical awareness and 1 NCO, and otherwise a full 15 troopers. Like, I can't really fit any more of anything into this army. And in terms of sheer material, this has been one of the best lists that I've written. Now, in terms of making changes, changes that you could very easily make. This Blackheart, if you're willing to cut it, could become a Wraith FTO, which can link up with a Harbinger. You could just about try and squeeze in a Skyhound as well, although doing so would probably require cutting something like a Puzzler, which you can do but would cause me physical pain. Skyhound is very worthwhile including, but is a little bit more of a cut. You'd be looking at things like, in that case, for example, cutting a Blackheart and a Puzzler, and then maybe having a few spare points left after the Skyhound was added to do something interesting with. Regardless, this is a list I've had a great deal of fun with. You can go and watch a Next Wave versus Toha battle report to see how it played, and it performed very well. Now, just to close the video out, because I did say that I would mention this, talking about some things that I would personally like changed about Next Wave, and I'm going to indulge just a little bit in backseat game design here, mostly because it's interesting the journey that I've been on. When I began playing Next Wave, I was like, this sucks, it's so difficult to write lists, why don't we have Imatrons, why are the Flash Drones AVA 1, you just increase the points cost of Ichadrons, this can't possibly be fair, this sucks and it's really difficult to write. To an extent, I still find some of that true, but there is so much cool stuff at the top end that, like, hey, it's okay if this faction isn't a slam dunk A plus in terms of power. Maybe we don't need more of those in the game. Maybe something that's mechanically complex and interesting and just powerful enough is fine. And so, as much as a little while ago I might have said, please just give me AVA2R drones, I'm not going to say that here. But I do think there are a few things they could consider adding or tweaking just to slightly ease the burden in this faction. The first one that I'd probably consider is adding a Harbinger Fireteam Master profile, like a 13-point specialist Fireteam Master. Give it some kind of a crappy gun, make the points cost work somehow. Paramedic, maybe? Just something that can do things like link with a Blackheart or with a Steeljaw without forcing you to take one of the very limited, very expensive Fireteam Master profiles. Don't necessarily know if it work, might not be within the design brief, but it feels like this faction is meant to have Fireteam Masters be part of its identity, and when your only Fireteam Masters are Pandora, Patroclus, and Drachios, doing things like fitting rain dancers into lists, for example, is just really difficult. So a cheap Fireteam Master, genuinely something that I would consider adding. The next thing I would like to genuinely see changed about the faction is just to give them one of the good Bit and Kiss profiles. Bit and Kiss only having the version where Bit is a repeater and you're desperately relying on, so Kiss is a repeater and you're relying on Bit's ballistic skill 11 dumb ass to fire off the single burst one pitcher, like it doesn't work. This faction would really benefit from access to a killer hacker that is kind of okay and starts on the table, and Bit and Kiss feel like they were meant to be that, but you cannot afford 25 points worth of kind of bad in this faction. The cheaper Bit and Kiss profile doesn't have to be the Onyx unique one, frankly it could be, but the profile that everyone plays because it works, where Bit and Kiss both have repeaters, sorry, pitchers, just and deployable repeaters, come to that, just feels like it would help give this faction more rounded entry-level hacking and kind of fulfill the promise that I thought this faction had when they showed off just the models that were available without showing the specific profiles. Bit of a bait and switch there. I feel frustrated by it. I think you could add the good Bit and Kiss profile without doing anything dangerous with this faction's power. And then finally, and this is a little weird, I think either the Sasha or the Rain Dancers should be given Smoke or Disco in some capacity. There's precedent for that. US Ariadna has access to a Sasha profile with a Disco Ball. Genuinely think you could just give that profile to this faction as well. Apparently the Sasha is meant to stay in Next Wave, which means it's kind of a home sectoral for her, so you can justify that pretty easily. And this faction's gunfighting is good, but it's not like a faction with a cutter. This isn't, I mean, Panoceania has better access right now to Smoke and Disco than this faction does. And Panoceania is a faction with Swiss Guards and cutters and Tikbalangs. Like, Panoceania doesn't hurt for best in-game firepower, and it's got good accessible disco. The fact that in Next Wave you're paying 36 points for a single disco profile, it's just something that would really help ameliorate some of the issues the faction has. Like, rain dancers, if they don't have smoke, would still be significantly assisted by having a model with smoke that isn't hugely expensive, that doesn't represent more than 10% of your entire army's points costs. And so the final thing that I would like really, and probably the most important thing that I would actually really like to see added to this faction is just something like either a Rain Dancer disco profile or just the 8-point Sasha disco ball profile, or both. Both of those, but especially the Sasha one, would be very valuable to this faction in a way that doesn't necessarily massively materially change its power, but does alleviate just a little bit of the pressure that it has when it's making all of those compromises at list building. That said, that is just me indulging briefly in some list building, in some like backseat game design list building fetching. They are not changes I actually expect to see made. This is not a Corvus Belli, I demand you adjust your game to my preferences. I will continue to play Next Wave as it is written. I think it's incredibly cool and I think it's incredibly fun, but those would just ease up on the pressure very slightly. Overall, and despite that, this is a faction I've had a tremendous amount of fun with. I do highly recommend it, just with the caveat that if you're a new player attracted to tech dinosaurs, probably just jump onto the Discord and ask for some lists to get you started. With that caveat, fantastic faction, very much enjoyed, and strongly recommend. If you'd like to support the channel, if you enjoyed this video, you can thank me either via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below, or by becoming a channel member on YouTube. It's the support of people like channel members and donors who let me continue to do this, and we put out about one video a week. Video posting might be a bit eclectic or sporadic over the Christmas New Year period, but I have been able to get this one together and up, so I hope very much that you've enjoyed it, and I will see you next time for more Infinity content.